You're listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. In this episode, I interview author Stephen Sautner, who's been an active contributor to the New York Times Outdoors column and has written a couple of books on the subject of fly fishing. His most recent is A Cast in the Woods, a story of fly fishing, fracking, and floods in the heart of trout country. Highly recommend this book if you enjoy reading about fishing, conservation, and the environment. And also, if you've ever considered buying that cabin in the woods for weekend getaways for trout fishing. So, hope you enjoy. This episode of The Sustainable Angler is brought to you by Emerger Strategies. Profit sustainably. For more information, visit emergerstrategies.com. Well, cool. Well, Stephen, I thought we'd just, get started with, if you want to kick things off with just telling me a little bit more about yourself and your background and how you started getting into writing.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I would call myself like an angler storyteller.
Yep.
I was a contributor to the New York Times Outdoors column for about 15 years.
Wow.
And I actually edited a book for them called Upriver and Downstream. And that was kind of a best of sort of my favorite columns over the years. And it wasn't just my own, it was a bunch of people. There was a point now, unfortunately, the Times Outdoors column has kind of gone away, but there was a time where it ran twice a week, and there was a whole stable of freelance outdoor writers who wrote about everything all over the world, from fishing for tigerfish in Zambia, which is a story I got to write.
Wow.
To local trout fishing, to whatever. And so, I proposed doing kind of a greatest hits, and they went for that. So that book came out in 2007. And then in 2016, I wrote a book called Fish On, Fish Off, which is kind of like the perils of DIY angling. I'm a completely self-taught fly fisherman and spin fisher and ice fisherman and everything. And, I had sort of accumulated all sorts of experiences over a career of fishing. And so I wrote a book about that. And then, I write for some of the magazines. I've kind of stepped that up a little bit, and I've been writing for Angler's Journal and American Angler, and I wrote something recently for This Is Fly, which is a fun online magazine, and I had something in Fly Fish Journal recently. It actually was an excerpt from my next book, which is A Cast in the Woods, and that's a story about my cabin that's up in the Catskills in a town called Hancock, New York.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the snapshot of my writing. My full-time job, I work for the Bronx Zoo, and I write about wildlife and wild places. The Bronx Zoo has conservation programs all around the world with scientists doing incredible work, saving everything from tigers to gorillas to humpback whales, and churning out a lot of cool studies and discovering things. And so my job is to sort of put those folks in touch with the media. So I'm kind of like a press guy. I pitch stories. I work with journalists all around the world and sort of talk about the great work that we do.
Wow, that's really cool. And so I guess since I've read your latest, A Cast in the Woods, I looked into your other books. I haven't read them yet, but they're on my to-do list.
Good.
But A Cast in the Woods, however, just for anyone, the literally tens of people that listen to this podcast. But it was really good in terms of, I found it really humorous. It was funny, and it was also like, because I mean that's kind of like the fantasy, I think, for a lot of people. Like, yeah, man, like I just want to get a cabin in the woods, Just
Yeah.
just have fish in my backyard, get to know the area super well, and I just really love that component of it because it was so relatable to me. I'm sure it's relatable to other people too.
Well, so the story of the cabin, you have to back up about 10 years. So I bought the cabin in 2003, and you actually have to go back to 1991. I was thinking about how this whole thing started. And it started with the first wild trout I ever caught on a fly rod in the Catskill Mountains. Actually, it was the first wild trout I ever caught, period, on a fly rod. And it was like my first ever mayfly hatch, the first time I ever saw rising trout. And I hooked a 16-inch rainbow trout, a wild rainbow trout. And I had never hooked a fish that frankly got so upset about me hooking it. It jumped and ran and jumped and ran and jumped and ran, and then it broke me off. And I sat there in the river going, oh my God, that was like I never had experience like that before. I had done a lot of fishing up to that point, but I did not fly fish. And it's a longer story, but I picked up a flyer. I bought a fly rod off a friend of mine, and I decided I'm going to learn how to cast this in the backyard. And then this first experience in 1991 with this rising trout, this 16-inch rainbow trout that I lost. And I think all anglers have this moment where they hook this like seminal fish, whether it's like a bonefish or a tarpon or whatever, and they go like, that's what I want to do. Yeah. This is what I'm going to do. And for me, it was wild trout in the Catskill Mountains. And so for the next 10 plus years, I would do day trips, or I would do camping trips, or I'd sleep in my car. From my home, from where I live, the Catskills are probably about a 2.5 hour, 125, 130 mile drive. And so but I did it for about a decade, back and forth and back and forth. And then I got this idea in the early 2000s. I was like, I got to get a cabin. I got to get a fishing cabin. This is the thing. I'm going to get a fishing cabin. I'm going to fish more. I'm going to drive less. And so my wife, who loves to fish too, we just started looking, and it took about 2 years to find just the right cabin. And it was surprising. You would think like in the Catskill Mountains, it'd be like all these cool little cabins, but there were surprisingly very few. Like I go to like a realtor and they go, oh, we got just the place. And they'd show me like a split level house, like from the suburbs. And I'd be like, well, no, I want a cat. Or they'd show me like literally a shack with nothing in it, just a shack, no electricity, running water, anything. And I was like, that's too rustic. Somewhere in the middle, we got to find like a happy medium. And then finally, after a lot of research, I found this place. It was a 1940s, vintage hunting cabin on 14 acres of unbroken woods, like these beautiful hemlock forests with these great rock formations out of Lord of the Rings. And it was just a beautiful place. And it had a quarter mile of wild trout stream flowing through it. And so this was it. And not only did I have this very small wild trout stream, but I was very close to the Delaware, the east branch of the Delaware, the west branch of the Delaware, the Beaver Kill, the Willow Emock River, all of these, like the cradle of American fly fishing was all like in my backyard. And so I thought to myself, well, this is it. I'm just going to fish whenever the hell I want to fish. Right. And that's what I thought I was getting myself into. And then the book is about how, as it turns out, owning a simple, vintage hunting cabin and a quarter mile of trout stream and 14 acres of woods is it's the opposite of simple. And I find out firsthand from all of these various things that happen, and I'm happy to get into.
Well, I mean, it was just really funny to me that, like, to your point where you're talking about, like, okay, I'm going to simplify my life and we're going to be in this cabin and it's really, we don't need much. And then, people are always quick to have that idea, but when reality sets in, when it's like, oh my God, like this is shelter for rodents, like, this is like heaven for them. Like, people don't, you don't ever hear that. So it was really hilarious to me to in reading the book that was, that you went in depth about, what you had to do to rid the cabin of rodents, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I probably killed, I don't know, hundreds of mice. And they come and go. Some years are worse than other years. But it got really bad, and I write about this when my wife had a mouse shit on her pillow in the middle of the night. And she woke up, and she woke up in the middle of the night. I'm sound asleep, and she felt something sort of tugging in her hair, and she's laying there, and she's like, "Oh, I'm imagining this. This isn't happening." Right. And then all of a sudden she's like, "No, there actually is something," and she's petrified. She can't move. And then finally she sits up and she looks around. She's, "What the?" And there's nothing there, and she turns on the light, and there was a mouse turd right on her pillow, right where she was sleeping, and that's when, like, it was just all out war. And that's when I just, oh my God, I just set, dozens of snap traps. And, snap traps are fine, but the best trap of all is the bucket trap, which, I don't know if you've heard of, but like you take a coffee can and you suspend it above like a spackle bucket off a rope, and you drill a hole in the top and bottom, and it rolls like a log roll, and you put peanut butter on the top and bottom. You fill it with water. You put a little ramp up it. I mean, it's this very Rube Goldberg thing, But the thing that's beautiful about it is it just keeps trapping them. Just the mice. So the mouse 1 falls in the water, drowns. Then mouse 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I think my record is a dozen in one night. And so there's a crawl space in our cabin. We put it up there, and the next morning I would just take it out and just go and pour out those mice in the stream, where I'm sure the crayfish just loved it. And I just did it until I stopped trapping them. And then, but and that's, like I said, they come and go, and you just trap them. You trap out the population until it's gone. And then the next year you're sleeping, and all of a sudden you hear the scurrying. You're like, okay, they're back. And then you put the bucket up and you trap some more. And it's part of living up there, like everyone who has a cabin up there has mice stories. I don't really think mine are any better or worse than others, except I do. My wife might not agree with that, since she did have the one on her pillow, but
right.
It's just part of it. It's just part of it.
Well, I had not heard about that trap until I read the book, and I was like, it's pretty genius.
Oh man, you go on YouTube, there's like a million videos on YouTube of people showing how this thing works, and they set up trail cameras, and you can see mice falling in the bucket, but it's lethal. It is and like I said, and you could set it for the weekend and just come back and just empty out the contents. It's a weekend cabin, so I can set it like on a Sunday and then come back on Friday, and hopefully it wasn't too hot and they haven't started to decompose too much, but it is a mouse vacuum is what that thing is.
That's awesome. Well, what was interesting to me, obviously, and it was just in the Fly Fish Journal, was the excerpt, was, the whole fracking component, which I want to kind of dive into a little bit, because, I don't know, and now I'm drawing a blank, even though I was preparing for this, and Gasland, right? Isn't that the name of the documentary?
Yeah.
So if you've seen that, then you sort of know, like, there's some pretty gnarly, nasty stuff going on with fracking. But this was, I thought your experience was particularly interesting. So without taking anything away from you, I'll let you sort of give the story there, and we can maybe dive in a little bit on the environmental side of things from there.
Sure. Well, Josh Fox, who wrote the movie Gasland, his place is probably, 30 or 40 miles from mine, in the same deposit called the Marcellus Shale, which is this huge, it's actually an old shallow water sea from the Devonian period. So like 300, 400 million years ago, I forget, where, all of these extinct fish species, which is ironic that this is what's caused this problem. They died and sank to the bottom of this shallow sea and apparently didn't decompose very much. And then like tectonic plates moved. I mean, we're talking about like, hundreds of millions of years of process, and eventually all of this organic matter in the form of all of these dead fish, that again died and sank to the bottom but didn't decompose because of the oxygen levels. It wasn't enough for them to decompose, but that turned into this vast gas deposit, and that's the Marcellus Shale. And the Marcellus Shale goes all the way through Pennsylvania, covers most of Pennsylvania. I think it dips down into Ohio and maybe even a little bit of West Virginia and then comes up into New York. And so when I bought my cabin, I didn't know about any of this stuff because none of this was in play yet, But what I did know was when I was buying the cabin and I was getting like paperwork from the previous owner, and there was like a right-of-way document in the deed that he worked out with the neighbor, and so there was a document about that, and I'm going, okay, and then I see this lease from Arco, the gas company, which now I think is owned by BP. It used to be Atlantic Richfield. Okay. It's this one sheet signed document of like, and I'm like, what is this? And it's, we give the right to Atlantic Richfield to, explore for energy on this property. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And this is the Catskill Mountains. This is like forests and streams and farms. This is not Texas. This is not the North Slope of Alaska. This is like the last place you'd ever think people would be exploring for energy. So anyway, I asked the lawyer, now this is before I bought my place, right? So I'm like just kind of gathering up things for the closing, and I go, what is this? And he goes, oh, yeah. So he goes, a long time ago, talking like back in the 70s, and maybe I guess into the 80s, there were some energy companies that were sort of poking around in the Catskills because there's this shale deposit called the Marcellus Shale. But they thought they could tap into this, but it's like a mile below the surface. They never could figure out how to do it, and so like they never did it. And I talked to other landowners, and they'd say, yeah. Every couple of years, these guys would come around, and we'd sign a lease for like a couple of bucks an acre, and it was just like found money. And they would sign the lease, they'd get a check, and that would be the end of it. And then maybe a few years later, the lease would expire, and then they'd get another lease offer, and they'd sign that. But nothing happened, zero. So fast forward to the early 2000s, and the whole it's called high-volume hydraulic fracturing technology was perfected by Halliburton, which is like Dick Cheney's old company. Right. And basically what that did, it was the technology that allowed them to drill down a mile down to the shale and then turn horizontally and drill through the shale and then blast the shale with chemicals and water and sand to rupture all the pockets of gas that would come bubbling up. And that's the technology that they perfected. And when they did that, it like revolutionized the energy industry. And now all of a sudden, all of these inaccessible pockets of shale that were a mile below the surface were all of a sudden accessible. And so then beginning in the early 2000s, they started drilling for the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, and, getting a lot of gas out of this stuff, and these like hard scrabble farms were signing leases, and all of a sudden they'd have like a gusher of natural gas, and then this whole land rush started, and Pennsylvania all of a sudden was booming in these like sleepy little farm towns overnight. All of a sudden, like the energy companies were fighting over who's signing which lease, and these lease prices started going crazy, and these farmers with these 100-acre farms that were barely holding on were like getting, thousands of dollars per acre plus royalties for gas they found. And it was a complete land rush, like a gold rush almost. And so all of a sudden I find out about this, that it's coming to the Catskills from a neighbor. And I never heard it. And I said, are you kidding me? No, it's got gas. We're going to be drilling for gas all around here. This is going to be great. And right. Well, it depended on who you spoke with. Some people were very excited. I mean, the town where I live in, where my cabin is, you know, it's not a wealthy place. It's a hard place to live year round. You know, the industries up there are logging and bluestone, quarrying for bluestone, and like service industry, and like that's about it. And so, you know, they're looking for economic opportunities. You know, farming has its ups and downs, and logging has its ups and downs, and whatever. But so people thought like this is going to be some people thought this is going to save our town. We're going to be prosperous, all this other stuff. So as a landowner and someone who cares about the environment and a wildlife guy and all the rest, and with the trout stream flowing through their property, I said, well, I got to research this and see what this is all about. And I learned about all of the things, if you ever watch Gasland, all the stuff that they talk about, which begins with the toxic fracking fluids they have to pump below the surface. And then when it comes up, what you do with all that waste disposal, you know, all that waste, and it's nasty stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just
please, yeah,
for anyone that's, you should, it's probably on Netflix or wherever else, you should check out Gasland. But it is the stuff that they use to so, you know, I guess fracturing is actually, in order for them to get through the rock, they have to like highly pressurized fluid. Well, water doesn't get the job done, even though it still uses like millions or trillions, or I don't know the right number there, but it uses a ridiculous amount of water. But because that doesn't
millions of gallons,
like millions of gallons, but because they
per
can't
per well, and then you start adding up all the other wells, and who knows what it finally comes to. But yeah,
well, then they add all this chemical and everything else, because that will actually break the rock apart, and that's what is the super nasty stuff. So anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to.
No, that's fine. And so, and you know, that's just part of it. So you have all the toxins from the fracking fluids and what to do with that, and radioactivity, because a lot of the shale has like natural radioactivity. So then that stuff comes bubbling up, mixed in with the waste fluids, and you have radioactive waste that you have to deal with. So you got that. You've got noise pollution. You've got light pollution. They flare these wells at night, and it's like a supernova. You know, they flare the contaminants out of it. I mean, it's basically an industrial process. It's like. And, you know, a neighbor signing a lease, it'd be like, you know, a neighbor coming up to you and going, oh, hey, how's it going? So, like, you know, instead of like, hey, I'm going to have a deck built on the back of my house, okay, just letting you know. It's like, I'm going to be opening up a factory right next door. And, like, you know, that produces toxic waste. So, see you, neighbor. You know, that's like kind of what. And then there's all these other issues that you know, when you hear about fracking, you hear about like the toxic waste and the flaring of wells and noise pollution, all that stuff. Then there's, you know, more subtle things like forest fragmentation. So every time they go into the woods and they punch in a new clearing, and all the infrastructure that goes in there, and all the humanity that goes in there, and then that well's done, and then you go to the next one, and what you do is you take. In the Catskills, one of the beautiful parts about the Catskills and what makes it such a special place, it has lots of unbroken woods. And living in those unbroken woods are wildlife that only like unbroken woods. And I'm a birder, and I think all trout fishermen, by the way, should be birders, and I'm surprised more aren't birders, because to me it's like so part of the trout fishing experience, they're birds. But anyway, a lot of the migratory birds that come from the tropics, like various warbler species and things like hermit thrushes and winter wrens and all these really cool birds that have these great songs and all this stuff, they are very sensitive to fragmentation of forest. So my 14 acres, because I'm a birder and I've got friends who are birders, you know, we've cataloged some really amazing birds that nest behind my cabin, and many of those species are the same ones that are going to wink out if you start fragmenting the forest. They just don't like disturbance. They'll just stop nesting there. So you combine all that stuff, all that whole picture of fracking, and I said, well, this is so not compatible with why I have this cabin and I'm a trout fisherman and, you know, a naturalist and a birder. Like, none of this is compatible in my opinion. So I didn't get in my neighbors' faces who signed, how dare you? I mean, it's their business. They, and I don't fault them for signing at all. I really don't. They felt like they believed fracking could be done in a way that wasn't harmful. I didn't believe that. So what do? You use like the public process that's available. And so for me, that meant like go to public hearings, write letters, testify at public hearings, go to Albany, the capital of New York State, and like go to like lobbying day and lobby your elected officials and all this stuff. Like, and again, like I brought my place to fish, you know,
right.
And now I'm like this friggin' fractivist, and I'm like I didn't sign up for this. But you know, here's the thing: the larger lesson I learned is, you know, now you can't. If you're going to own a piece of property, or if you're going to, you know, this stream is going to be your home water, and it's this whole like rep your water thing, which I know you guys have embraced, which is really cool. I mean, you have to be an advocate for it. You can't just fish and go home and just fish and go home, because there's always going to be a threat to it. It's just the way it is. There's too many people wandering around the planet, with some of which have really bad ideas of what to do to a trout stream and a landscape. So you know, you always have to fight for it. And so that's what I did. And I wrote letters, and I went to the hearings and all that stuff. And it was a several year, drawn out, very scary battle. And eventually New York State banned fracking, which was awesome. And one other thing I want to point out, you know, I was offered a lease to sign, you know, several leases. I was getting offers. I forget how many I got. I got a bunch of offers though. You know, sign here, you know, up, you know, $2,500 an acre. And I was like, holy crap! I mean, this could pay for my cabin almost. Yeah. So, and you know, but then I was like, how could I do that? I'm like selling the brook trout and the rainbow trout. You know, I'm like selling their souls for whatever. You know, I had no interest in it. To me, it was just wasn't a question about it. But you know, that was part of it too. You know, people were, and the interesting part of it was. People that were against it, some of them were like, you know, from New York City, and they fished up there, and then people were like, well, you don't, you know, what do you care? You just fish up here. But I was, as a landowner, I kind of felt like I had a little more to say. I had a little more at stake, and when I argued, when I wrote my letters and when I testified, I was very quick to point out, I am a property owner here, and I don't want it. You know, it's not like it's I'm from downstate and all I want are the benefits of trout fishing, but I have really no other stake in it. I had a personal stake in it, which was, you know, an interesting perspective, buying a cabin and being on the front lines of that battle. So, well, and you know, it was like I said, like New York State banned it, and which was great. But I know, like, it's not going away. Like, the energy companies will always be eyeballing up there. It's like forbidden fruit for them. They want to get to it somehow. So you kind of always have to stay on it. And every now and then you'll hear about, you know, energy company X wants to put a pipeline through. And, you know, so you can't ever turn your back on it. You can't ever say like, oh, we won, let's go trout fishing and never worry about it ever again. It's just, you can't. You always have to sort of be on guard about it.
Yeah, and I mean that's the, you know, so a couple things that I think, you know, one is I think it was a good example of, you know, from my perspective, and this is totally generalized intentionally, but like there's really three threats to fisheries everywhere. You know, it's population, it's policy, and it's pollution in the form of whether that's plastic or greenhouse gas emissions. But, you know, for the most part, those are three big ones, and I kind of like call them the three Ps. But I think your story was such a good example of showing that, you know, yes, you can influence policy in a way that helps protect the fishery. And it was a good success story that I think we need more of, because that's one thing, you know, as someone who's, you know, an environmentalist and a conservationist, it's easy to get caught up in the negative hype. And I think when there's a success story like the one in your book, that it should be noted and, not brushed under the rug, because it should be celebrated. But to your point, you can't ever turn your back on it, because that they're not gonna. That's not just end all be all. Like they're gonna.
The war isn't over.
Right.
War, the battle. That battle was definitely won. But there is a war of the natural resources of the world's natural resources. Let's face it. There's a war going on, whether it's logging or energy exploitation, and there's one side has one view of how it should be done, and the other has another view of how it should be done, and that's come on, you see it every day.
Yeah.
Whether drilling in the Arctic is in that tax bill that was kind of snuck in at the last minute. I can't believe that wasn't made into a bigger deal. That there is it's on the table. It's not even on the table. It's actually going to happen. If it could very easily happen that they will drill for energy that we don't really need in the most pristine wilderness in the United States. I just find that just beyond shameful that some people think that's a good thing. Oh yeah, we don't need the energy. If we could save that by minimal conservation or going toward renewables or whatever. And there's so much of it. It just drives you crazy. And the thing that really drives me nuts about this whole thing is like there is a subset of outdoors people that kind of side toward like, oh yeah, we need the energy. Let's drill on our public lands, and I just don't see how they can compatibly like really love fishing in the outdoors and think that that's good, and that you got. And that's something that they should be on the other side and fight for. Like, no, we got to fight for clean water and public access to our lands and not exploit it and all that other stuff. And I'm shocked. Sometimes I'm really shocked at my fellow anglers that the views they have are so like, wow, really? I thought like we're all fishermen and we all think a certain way, and we all really value and cherish our rivers and streams, but apparently that's not the case. I don't know where these guys are coming from, but
no,
it's stunning.
It's not the case at all, and that's happening, with offshore drilling and off the Atlantic coast, and people, I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and everyone in this community completely opposes it, because it's like, look, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when there's a leak. And when there's a leak, we're a tourist town. Like, so if you remove tourism dollars from people who are just coming to enjoy the city and the food and, how beautiful it is here, then it's absolutely not worth it, especially when there are viable alternatives that exist. Solutions exist to it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's being jammed down your throat that like, no, we need this. And what they're really saying is we're the number one exporter of oil in the world now. So that's what they're really saying. So, while that may be your opinion, we know what's best and we're going to keep drilling, which is, it's crazy to me.
It is. I think that, it was celebrated during the State of the Union that, we're the number one exporter. Yay! It's like, we got to get away from this stuff. Look, I drive to work. I drive a car.
Yeah.
I use fossil fuels. I do. That's just the way it is.
No doubt.
However, I do recognize that the things going on with the climate and all the rest of it, and that we really have to move away from this any way we can. And I support anything that would bring us toward that goal. And anything else is destructive, and it's really a backwards view of where this world is going. And so but unfortunately, all this stuff is going to be apparent very soon. We see it. There was the story today. This year was the fourth warmest on record or something. I don't know. All of this stuff is coming with a price. and you know, trout rivers are closing now earlier because of warm. I mean, you know, as a fisherman, we're all gonna see this stuff firsthand, and I don't think it's gonna be. I know it's not gonna be for the best. So,
no,
without trying to get too depressed about the whole thing, but I guess back to the book and I guess the fracking battle. I mean, battles can be won. It's a lot of work, and there was a whole army that was mobilized about this, people that were never involved in this stuff, myself included, who wound up, you know, I would never think like, I'm going to take a day off from work and drive to friggin' Albany and meet with the officials. The last thing I wanted to do, but like, hey man, I'm doing it for the trout and the warblers and all the rest. That's what I got to do. Well, if I want to maintain this bucolic landscape, it's what I got to do.
Well, I mean, and to your point, I mean, you know, as you said, you know, it does kind of get depressing, and I agree with you, but I think that's an underlying theme. I think is the power of activism and the fact that you still it is not only worth fighting for, the battle can be won. You know, I think that's the message. You know, it's like this is you know, you could get depressed to the point of be like, well, it doesn't really even matter what I do. Like, this is just the way things are happening, but that's just not true. And so if you decide to take a stand on something and believe in it and find out that, hey, there's more people that have similar views, then it's not just hey, we're going to do what we're going to do regardless of your feelings. You can actually win the battle, and that battle was won thanks, you know, to your efforts, and I'm sure many other people in the area who were against fracking for the sake of the love of the land and the impact it's going to have on it.
Yep, absolutely. And it's good to see companies out there that are really starting to do the right thing, like the podcast you had with the CEO of Patagonia. You know, like what an admirable thing they're doing. You know, I mean, all around. You know, they took their tax cut and they donated it, which was awesome. But like the whole view of their products and fixing products and not just getting a new one because there's a little pinhole in your waders and all that. I mean, I just love that. And like, I own a pair of Patagonia waders, proudly own them. And that'll be the only pair of waders I ever buy again, you know. And plus, I'll say the waders the waders I own, the longest lasting waders I've ever had. Out of like the 50 pairs of waders, I still have these Patagonia waders. They're friggin' bulletproof. So whatever. I mean, I just love their whole philosophy. And the other person you had from Costa Sunglasses, I mean, it's great, the stuff they're doing, recycling, fishing net. I mean, it's really inspiring to see there are companies out there that are really committed to doing the right thing, and God, we should all support them however we can.
Absolutely, and similarly, the same with your book. People should you should go buy this book because it is a Cast in the Woods is a not only a really I thought hilarious book, but like I said, you know, not to repeat everything, but you know, the success story. Those are the stories that have to be shared to just keep your sanity. Right. You know, I mean, and just the whole message of hope that, you know, you don't back away from it. You take it on and confront it. And at the end of the day, if you hadn't won that battle, I'm sure you would have slept just as well, knowing that you did what you could. You know.
Yeah, I think so. And there are fishing stories in the book. It's not just about fracking.
Yeah. By the way, everyone, this is not a 2-chapter book about fracking and mice.
And mice, yeah. And it was the thing about the fishing chapters, which are all like journal entries, you know. And the reason I put them in there was because they're like at the end of each of the chapters about fracking, and there's a whole thing about floods that we can talk about, which could be climate change related, probably is. But anyway, I end all the chapters with a fishing journal entry because it was always like, no matter how bad things got, you know, when it really felt like they're going to start fracking, you know, tomorrow, I would, and I'd feel really bad, I would like go out in the Delaware and catch like a 20-inch brown, and I'd be like, oh, okay, it would like recharge me, you know? It's like, it would remind me why you're there and what you're fighting for and all this stuff, or I'd catch like a, a brook trout in my little brook under perfect conditions, a little gem of a 6-inch trout, and I go, oh yeah, okay, that's why I'm up here. That's why you got to keep fighting. And so I do get into some of the fishing adventures in great detail, and it was important for me, having lived through the experience and writing about it. I kind of needed to do that because I had to remind myself I'm a fisherman, and the reason I'm up here is to fish, and that's the thing that I'm trying to celebrate. But yet at the same time, I'm casting with one hand and like fighting off all of these threats and stuff with the other, and I guess that's kind of what it's about.
Well, that too, is an interesting point. Is you talked about birding, which I enjoyed, which I want to get more into, which I have not yet, admittedly, but it's something that's super interesting to me. I have a young daughter, and I want to be able to see what that is, and point it out. And
yeah, there you go.
And so. But that said, with the flooding, fracking, birding, fishing, what's interesting about that to me too is the understanding of the interconnectedness of everything, and more thinking in terms of. I had a conversation, or I did another podcast interview recently, and we talked about that, ecosystem and holistic thinking in terms of. It's not just about the fish; it's everything that is associated with it, and it's all connected. You can't. The same with the flooding. The same with we start fracking. Well, that doesn't just impact the fish. There's going to be birds that don't come. Well, what does that mean? What is that going to do to the insect population that the trout eat? It's all. You can't have it your way one way.
Right.
Everything has a ripple effect.
And, again, I learned all this stuff firsthand. Just, again, buying a cabin and thinking, I'll just fish. It's going to be great. I'll just fish all the time. Perfect. Fish. And then, so I have this series of floods, and I write about this. And so there's 3 floods in 3 years, right? And the first one, this is like 2 years after I get the place. I have 2 years of just kind of blissful, yay, everything's cool. And then I get the first flood. That's a 100-year flood. That's what they call it. And then that's in year 1. And year 2, I have a 500-year flood. And then year 3, I have a 700-year flood. So if you do the math, I have 1,300 years of floods in 3 years, right? Which is, and is it exacerbated by climate change? Probably. I don't know. So the 700-year flood destroys my stream. Yeah. Just destroys it. It looks like the LA River, like the Los Angeles River, like that drainage ditch from the movie Grease, That's what it's smaller, but that's what it looks like. There's no all the hundreds of shade trees are gone. There's no vegetation in the banks. All the pools fill in. All the trout pools are all like an inch deep. All the insect life's gone. All the trout are gone. It's just dead. It's a dead looking. The day I came up there after that 700-year flood was one of the worst days of my life. Looking at that stream and just going oh my God, it's completely gone. And I could have said, screw it, sell the place, loss, buy. Right. Or I could have said, I'll stay up here, and then I'll tell my grandkids hey, see that drainage ditch? There used to be brook trout in there. Or I could try to restore the friggin' stream. And so that's what I did. And I read all these books about restoring streams, and I went to all these websites, and I spoke with experts, and I learned about basically tree planting. That's how you restore, that's what Trout Unlimited does when they restore streams. They stake willows and dogwoods and all these species that provide shade and armor the banks and prevent erosion. So I plant hundreds and hundreds of trees, and they slowly grow back because the soil now is basically just rock because of the flood, but they do grow back, and then the stream kind of, this over the course of 2 years, it kind of re-engineers itself, and I get to see this firsthand. Every time there's a rainstorm and the stream goes up a little, I look, and it's wow, it's scoured out a little bit of a pool there, and then oh wow, these willows are coming in and providing a little shade. And then 2 years after this flood, with this drainage ditch, lifeless drainage ditch, I looked at this pool, and I'm that's an interesting looking pool now. And I get my fly rod. I hadn't made a cast in the stream in 2 years, and I make a cast, and a brook trout comes up, and I land this 6-inch brook trout, and I'm oh my God, And they recolonized because the upper part of the stream beyond my property wasn't as destroyed, and they must have somehow recolonized, and it was incredible. But getting back to the whole interconnectedness of it, so I realized that trout streams, I thought, before, this is all before any of this stuff, I was like, yeah, trout streams like water, bugs, and trout. That's all it is.
Right.
That's oversimplification. And then I realized, well, actually, it's here in the east, northeast, it's so reliant on trees. Trees are such an integral part of a trout stream because they shade the stream, they prevent erosion, and they provide cover, like root wads and then trees that fall in the stream. Trees are like so critical that. So then if you're planting trees and you want your trees to flourish, what do you need? Well, you need birds. And you need birds because birds eat all the pest insects. And then birds will reseed and drop seeds along the stream. And then, okay, what else? So you need birds, and what else do you need? Well, deer will browse your seedlings to nothing. So you need black bears to feed on the deer, And so it's all interconnected. And it was so cool when I realized, I am like a steward now. I'm not just a fisherman of this little stream. I'm like a steward of these 14 acres, and I got to keep everyone happy. Everyone, and starting with the trout and working my way along, and everything from toads that eat the bugs, that eat the trees, that could potentially eat the trees, and and so it became so fascinating and fulfilling. And so much beyond just fishing to realize that. And it makes it's just so much, it's so much more profound experience now to go out of my little stream now that it's come back. And it has, it's a beautiful stream once again, and it's full of little trout. And it's such a more profound experience to go out and fish it and look and go oh, I planted all those. That's cool. And then you see the warblers, you hear the warblers singing overhead, and you spook a little pickerel frog that jumps in, and you flip a rock and you see a spring salamander. And it's just it's like a deep, profound experience now. It's great. I love it.
No, and that was what I got out of it too, was just reading it. It was inspiring to me to be God, I want to, I want to know more about, my own backyard. What is this?
Yeah.
What do I need to? It was really inspiring, and I highly recommend anyone listening to check it out. I do have a question for you though, because I also want to be cognizant of your time, but. Sure. I wonder, are there any, with tree restoration, like you mentioned that you had to talk to experts and stuff, were there any books about that you can recall that maybe you recommend? Because I'm just interested in it, how can I learn more about that or birding or anything like that? Are there any of those types of books that you recommend?
I got in touch with a guy from Trout Unlimited who was really helpful, and
cool.
He put me in touch with all of these resources, and there's symposiums on restoring streams, and the U.S. Forest Service has these online booklets and stuff, and the Soil Conservation Service does a lot. They do a lot of work on restoring streams. The Fish and Wildlife Service has various programs. So, most of the research you could do nowadays would be online, but I think my first stop would be Trout Unlimited, because that's what those guys do, and they're good at it, and they know the resources. The one book that was very valuable, and I don't even know if it's still in print, was called Restoring Streams in Cities.
Really?
And yeah, and the reason I got that book was because my stream looked like the Los Angeles River. So I was it looks like an urban stream now. It's got no vegetation, nothing. So, and that's where I learned about staking willows, which is where you get a. I thought this was so fascinating. Willows, you can just take a cutting. You could take a branch of a willow, as long as it's more maybe an inch wide, and cut it into a stake, like a foot-long stake, and tap it into the ground as far as you can, and do it in the when they're dormant. You do it in the late fall, and in the spring, you'll get a brand new willow tree will root and come up from that and grow quickly. And it's amazing. I thought it was like a magic trick. And so I remember the first stream restoration bit I did was I staked 50 willows, which was a lot of work, staking into that rock. It took a long time. And now those willows, some of those willows are like, I don't know, 20 feet tall now, really? And they shade the stream, and they armor the banks. The thing about willows is their roots are really fibrous, so you want something that's going to not erode your bank. That's what you do. So, you know, there are a lot of resources out there. In terms of birding, I got the secret to birding is find someone who's really good at birding and go with them.
Right.
That's the secret. That's how I learned how to bird. And then you just go like, what's that? What's that? What's that?
Yeah, yeah.
And that one sounds exactly like that. And they go, well, no, actually, it's a little different. You know, all right. So it's like hanging out with a good trout fisherman. You know, that's a great way to learn. It's like it definitely helps the learning curve rather than like trying to figure it out on your own. But
well, that's sort of where I've like hit a dead end with it. You know, it's like, well, no, I wouldn't say a dead end. I'm just like, there's just no way. Like I don't know. I like in the book when you were like, you know, were able to like verbalize what something like a bird sounded like, you know, like this bird sounds like he's saying this. It was like, yeah, that's awesome, but like they kind of all sound not similar, but you know what I mean? Like it's different it's hard to distinguish. I'm like, well, what is that?
Yeah. You got to train your ear like anything.
Yeah.
Like, you know, train your ear. Like tying a fly. You know, the first time you did it, you're like, what the hell? Like brain surgery. And now you'll probably whip them out by the dozen.
Well, speak for yourself. All right. Well, if you could, you know, I guess leave a message for anglers out there, you know, related to conservation or climate change or environmentalism, whatever that message would be, I guess, that you wish, because we kind of talked about, you know, like, God, like how are there some, like, it's kind of disappointing that you're like, how could you support some of this? What message would you leave for someone to maybe try and convince them otherwise that you know it's worth the effort and it's worth protecting?
Well, I think do it for selfish reasons, because if you don't, I mean, seriously.
No, I love it. It's true.
Yeah, if you don't, you're going to lose it. You know, I mean, it's like, again, there are all sorts of folks out there who look at the resources that we want to protect and preserve, look at it in like, how do I make a buck off this by exploiting it, and not in a sustainable way, in a non-sustainable way. And then also, you know, in terms of fishing, you know, I think back to when I started fishing in the early 1980s. I started saltwater fishing in the Northeast, and there's several species that I used to fish for that they're basically extinct. I mean, like winter flounder, which we used to catch in abundance, they're gone. I mean, I couldn't catch a winter flounder if you know, maybe I could, like, if I spent like 3 weeks, maybe I catch one. Then there's other fish like whiting, which is this, you know, it's this saltwater fish that used to run in the surf in the Northeast. Like,
we have them down here.
I couldn't catch. You could get. It's a different kind of whiting.
Oh, okay.
This is called a silver hake. You guys have I think it's a southern kingfish, which is, you know, it's one of these like local names. There's like a million different, like bonita. There's like 6 different fish called bonita, but the whiting I'm talking about is also a silver hake. I don't know the Latin name of it, but they used to run in the surf in the Northeast where I grew up fishing, and you could give me $1 million and I couldn't catch a whiting now. They're just gone. They are gone. And so, you know, and they're gone probably because of climate change and overfishing, some combination. So, you know, if things were different 40 years ago, I don't know, maybe I'd still be catching whiting. So I would just tell people, part of fishing is no longer just like catching a fish and going home and forgetting about it. You gotta, like I was saying, rep your water or rep your species or whatever, because there's constantly threats. I mean, striped bass are now in very low numbers where I am, and no one, you know, maybe overfishing, who knows why. I mean, it's depressing stuff. I don't know what now in November nights, I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself. I used to be out sport casting or fly fishing for bass, and now they're not around. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? But then there's other fish that are doing really well, like the wild trout fisheries in the Catskills right now are doing great. So let's work to preserve them and protect them.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's a positive note to end on. And I would just like to say, thank you for writing your book. I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to pick up your other two as well. But also really appreciate you just taking some time to talk with me about this. I mean, this is sort of I like when I talk to a company, like maybe someone who works for a company, we talk specifically about climate change. But what I like about this is seeing how things like fracking impact the environment before you burn the fuel. I mean,
yeah.
It's not like the supply chain where it's like, hey, I'm gonna use fuel to ship everything, and it takes energy to go into the production of it. It's just this is pre-product, I guess, and
it's dirty from the start.
Yeah, exactly. And so this was to me was really engaging and interesting. So I do appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. For more episodes and to stay current with the latest, don't forget to follow us on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher.